My name is Shane Thomas. I'm a staff software engineer at Gatsby. You can follow me on Twitter if you're not already, smthomas3. You'll see a lot of Gatsby stuff and a lot of Drupal related stuff on that feed. My main job is focusing on improving the integration between Drupal and Gatsby and getting them to play nice together and trying to make it a better experience so we can have more decoupled Drupal sites that are powered by Gatsby on the front end. I do some other things. I work with Shopify and some other data sources, but most of the time it's Drupal related stuff. And I've been doing Drupal work for probably, 10, 11 years now. It's been quite a while. So we're going to be talking today about how we're improving the content editor experience with Gatsby and Drupal. So developers invest a lot of time in building the apps and the websites that they're working on, but they're not usually the ones, I built a lot of websites. I'm not usually the one that's using it once it's launched. So you might be wondering, what's the point? Why does it matter? We focus on the user. We want to make the user experience great. We're doing our jobs the best we can. But a lot of times we just forget about that. The content editors will likely spend more time on the site than anyone else, including the users. Most users come to a site a few times, maybe a couple times a week, if it's a popular site. But the content editors, the ones that are creating the pages, the articles, the blog posts, whatever that's on that site, are probably going to spend a lot more time on the actual finished site than the users or obviously the developers as well. So sometimes it can leave them feeling a bit like this. Developers launch the site, they're happy, and the content editors are saying, hey, what about me? I'm feeling a little bit left out. Maybe you didn't think about everything that I need. And this is especially true when you're talking about using new technologies such as Gatsby, where maybe that focus isn't always at the forefront. So what do these content editors actually want? Well, at the base level, they might want a lot, right? But at the base level, what they really want is they want to know what the content's going to look like before it's published. They want a content workflow that's going to fit their needs, so it fits the needs of their organization, whatever that might be. And they want to know that when they press the publish button, they want to know the content's going to get live, and they want to know when it's going to get live. So let's look at how we're going to do this with Gatsby and Drupal. But before we do, why might you want to use Drupal with Gatsby? If you've used Gatsby before, I'm assuming most of you use Drupal, but if you've used Gatsby before, you might have used something like Contentful or some other headless CMS that are really easy to spin up and use, probably a lot easier to get started with than Drupal out of the box. So why would you choose to use Drupal instead of one of those simple headless CMSs that don't take very long to get set up? Well, if you're working with a larger organization, you have complex content editing workflow needs, Drupal's a good fit for that. You know that they have pretty complex content moderation module that allows you to really specify, drafts and archive status and all the different workflows that a publishing company or website might need. And a lot of the headless CMSs don't really offer anything other than published or unpublished, and that doesn't always fit the needs of what you need on a website. And also, a lot of those headless CMSs don't really have support for maybe a development and separate staging website where you can have where you can start working on features in parallel to stuff that's already live. So Drupal works really well for that, right? We kind of already have that workflow built in. We know how that works, and we can just add Gatsby on the front end of it. If you really want to control the code of your CMS, Drupal's obviously open source. It's a great choice for that. You can host it how you want. You can customize it. It's pretty flexible. So that, of course, is a lot more flexible than some of the other headless CMSs out there. And this is probably one of the biggest ones. If the organization you're working with is already familiar with Drupal, just adding Gatsby on the front end is a lot less of a change than trying to switch the back end and the front end at the same time. They can still use the content tools that they're used to, but the website's just going to build a little differently, and it's going to use some more modern tools. So we're going to show a demo, and one of the things that, if you wanted to follow along later, all I have is you need a working Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 site. I'll use Drupal 8. You need a Gatsby site, the Gatsby Drupal module, and I should say the Gatsby site uses Gatsby source Drupal, which I'll talk about in a second. And in this example, we're using a Gatsby Cloud account. But the only thing you would need the Gatsby Cloud account for this demo is if you want to use incremental builds. And we'll talk about, if you don't want to use Gatsby Cloud, how you can still get much faster builds. And I will mention that the Gatsby Drupal module now has an RC release. So if you haven't used it for a while, please, I would love some feedback on it. Test it out. There's probably plenty of bugs that still need to be fixed, and more are coming in, kind of each day now that it's starting to, I guess, have a little bit more usage. So feel free to test this out and tell me things are broken, and we will make sure we get them fixed. So yeah, excited about that. But let's go ahead and get to the demo. So the first thing is I have a Drupal site with this module. It's drupal.org/project/Gatsby. I have a Gatsby site that is using Gatsby source Drupal. And some of you are using Gatsby source GraphQL. That won't work completely with this demo, but that won't work today. We're making and adding more support if you want to use Drupal's GraphQL module instead of Drupal's JSON API module. So for this demo, I'm assuming that you're using Gatsby source Drupal and Drupal's JSON API module. But just know that if you are already using Drupal's GraphQL module, that support for that is coming. It's going to be here hopefully in the next month or two. So I have a Drupal site here. This is going to look pretty familiar to everyone, just pretty much out of the box. There's a few articles here, and it just has an image, some body, and title text. Really nothing too fancy, but it's a basic site. I also have a Gatsby site here, which I'm going to just go ahead and run Gatsby develop. And this should go ahead and pull in my content using Gatsby source Drupal into this Gatsby site. Now, I'm not going to show the code of this, but it's pretty straightforward if you've worked with Gatsby before. If you haven't, just know that this code is available right here, and there'll be a link to it in the slides, which I will share. This is the same demo I used in our booth at DrupalCon, so that's why it says DrupalCon here. But just know that it's just a really basic Gatsby site. The only thing it's doing is pulling in that article content from this Drupal site, and it's using Gatsby source Drupal to do that. So I have, if I go to the main page of the site, it's pretty much the Gatsby starter with some little color changes. And there's an articles page, which you can see are the same articles from the Drupal site right here. Now, all this Drupal site has in order to get that to work is JSON API installed. And then you can go ahead and use Gatsby and pull in the content, and it just works as you see here, with a little bit of code to make this happen, of course. But now let's think about the content editors and what the content editors really need, because the content editors want to be able to change this and see these changes before they actually go live. So as I said earlier, I have this Git repository here. It's on GitHub. And I have a Gatsby Cloud account. So Gatsby Cloud is a great way to set up live preview and incremental builds, but just know that you don't need Gatsby Cloud in order to use live preview. You can run it on your own node server. You can run it locally. All you need to be running is the Gatsby develop command, and you need to just point the Drupal site to that server. So in this case, I'm using Gatsby Cloud because it's easy to set up. But all I have here is I have this preview site. If I go to it, you'll see it looks just like the site that I'm running locally. If I go to the articles page, it's going to look identical, which is what we want. So now I had to configure my Drupal site using this Gatsby Drupal module to point to this preview site that I have. And to do that, let's look at the modules I have installed. You can see I have the Gatsby module, and then I have one specific to using JSON API. So if you didn't have this, you can still get live previews to work if you're using the GraphQL module, but I'm using the JSON API module, so I have this enabled as well. And if I configure this, all I had to do is drop in the URL to my preview server, which is right here. And I also dropped in the webhook to my incremental build server, which is also available through Gatsby Cloud. I just grabbed that from Gatsby Cloud. And I had to specify what entity types I want to send to the preview and build server. So in this case, just file and content. But if you're using paragraphs or Drupal's media, this would all work. So all I did was save this, and this should let me, assuming that everything's working as it was last time I tested this, 20 minutes before this session to make sure it worked. It should let me edit this content and see these changes. So let's say I wanted to go to this last post I just created, and I'm going to go ahead and just maybe I'll add some exclamation points. I'll make some text bold, maybe italicize that. And now you'll notice when I click save, you notice how it immediately changed over here. Oops, and we'll go ahead. We'll just leave it like that for now. But you can see the italicis is there, the bold is there, the title changed. Everything changed as soon as I immediately changed it on the live site. So if we go to this new post here, and I really don't want this bold anymore, click it. You can see it immediately changes, no refresh needed. It all just worked. And it's all set up and working. And so my live preview is working. So as a content editor, that's a pretty compelling experience. So you can save something and you can see it right away. One thing you'll also notice though is in my Gatsby cloud account, each time I'm doing that, it's triggering a incremental build. So if I go back a ways to where I made a code change, you can see my full build time to build this website took 49 seconds. But these last 3 incremental builds that I made took 1 second, 2 seconds, and 1 second. And what that means is that my live site, which could be sitting out on Netlify or Vercel or Fastly or any other CDN hosting provider, would be built and deployed in this amount of time. So I don't have this hooked up to, I'm not hosting this live, but if I were to go here, you can see that my changes are made. So no bold here, this is now bold. And just to show you one more quick thing, and I'll try to go through this kind of quick. Let's assume I want to create a new post. Just do it really quick here. I'll grab an image. Don't know how this is going to look, but assume I don't want it to be published. So remember, this over here is this my preview server? Yes, this is my preview server, I believe. If I save this, you can see it immediately shows up here on the preview server. But if I go here, it did not trigger an actual build, and that's because it's not published yet. However, once I go in here and click the publish button, this should, if I hurry up, I should be able to see it. You can see it queues this up. And since this is a new piece of content, it'll probably take a few more seconds than just 1 or 2. But this should run here in a second. It'll take a few seconds, and then it will actually be live. So this one's taken a few more seconds. So built in 11 seconds. So that's a little longer than normal, but you can see that it doesn't take that long for a new or an incremental change to be built and deployed. So you can imagine this is my live site here. In 10 seconds after saving that article, your content editor has the actual site live and ready to go. Their changes are pushed up. So if you've used Gatsby in the past and you've always wondered how's it going to work for a larger organization that makes hundreds of edits a day, if you only have to wait 10 seconds, that's a little more reasonable than waiting 5, 10, sometimes 15, 20, 30 minutes for a full Gatsby build to run. So that's the live demo, but let's talk about the future of Drupal and Gatsby. So the goal is to, of course, keep improving because we have kind of a good base here. We got live preview, we got incremental builds, but it's definitely far from where we ultimately want it to be. But we do want to keep making things better for content editors. That's kind of the theme of this talk. So the first thing is there's more to content than just published or unpublished. So we showed, when I had the content unpublished, you could see it in preview. When it was unpublished, it would go to the preview server, but not the build server, but it would only go to the build server when it was published. We want to make it so it works a little bit more integrated with Drupal's content moderation workflow. So if you had a draft, if you had content that was archived, you want to make sure you can see previews of that content as it goes through the process. So you know what's live, you know what's in current draft state, and you know when you actually want to publish it, what it's going to look like when it gets deployed to the live site. So if you look at Drupal also having revisions, it would be really nice if I could go back to any revision on a piece of content, click a button, and immediately see what that revision looked like. That way you could see how content changed over time. Right now that's not currently possible, but adding a link to this UI, for instance, and having it pop open in the preview and seeing that specific revision is something that we definitely want to have at some point. And the other thing is content editors still want to know when their content actually does go live. They're not used to waiting for a build process. Incremental builds makes that incredibly better because you know it's 5 to 10 seconds. But if it happens to be 10 seconds and they click save, the content editor doesn't want to have to refresh 2 or 3 times while they wait to see it on their live site. So the next step is to add a build indicator or a progress indicator directly on the Drupal site. So when you click save, it shows you either in the menu bar or above the piece of content that it's publishing. And once it's published, it gives you a happy face or a green check mark or something to show you that, hey, it is actually public now, it's viewable. Here's the link to go view it live on the live site. And it'll give content editors that warm, fuzzy feeling that, hey, everything's okay, it's building, okay, now it's good to go. And one other thing, and this is kind of a little bit something I've talked about in the past, and it's always kind of been on my mind of somewhere I want to get to someday, but editors want to see a preview of their content as they create it. So this is a demo, a working demo. This is from a while ago, but it shows that it's possible, but there's a lot of edge cases. You can see as you're typing on the left, it's immediately changing in the live preview on the right. You don't have to worry about clicking save, click preview. There's a lot of rough edges in Drupal that make this problem hard to solve, but it is still something that I've spent quite a bit of time trying to solve in the past, and I'm going to, at some point, try to solve again in the future. So where you can actually immediately see the changes. This gets a little more complicated when you're using nested entities like paragraphs and things of that nature, which is why it's kind of been pushed to the back burner a little bit, but it's something that is definitely on my mind to try to get in the hands of the content editors that we're trying to build sites for. And one other thing, and this is something that's coming pretty soon, is that organizations often have multiple websites. And with Drupal, you know that a lot of times a large organization might have had 5 or 10 or 15 or more Drupal websites with all their different web properties that they might have had. But what if a content editor could manage all of that content from one Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 website and just deploy it out to all their Gatsby sites? So they might have a bunch of Gatsby front-end sites, but they can put all their content under one roof. So if you're a content editor, you can use Drupal to manage your roles and permissions, but know that the content that they're changing only goes out to the correct sites. So the Gatsby Endpoints module, which is going to be a sub-module as part of the Gatsby Live Preview module here, so it'll all be included, just be optional to turn on or off, will allow you to source multiple Gatsby front-end sites from a single Drupal backend. This will include live preview and incremental build support. So you could have live preview for a bunch of different sites. So maybe something like this, where if you think about having a blog site, but maybe you have actually 3 blog sites, one about cooking, one about hiking, and one about photography or something like that, you could have one Drupal backend sourcing to 3 or 4 or however many Gatsby sites that ingest that content. You can live preview, you can use incremental builds, and it would all work. Or more commonly, maybe with a large marketing team that has a bunch of different web properties, websites, you could set up one Drupal CMS, customize it to fit the needs of the organization, and the content editors use one thing, but the developers get to use Gatsby and build each site completely independent, The branding could be whatever it needs to be. They don't have to look anything alike, but they're sourcing content from the same place. And this could also make a lot of sense if you've ever used multilingual sites and you want to have different domains or different sites for different languages. One other thing is if you can't use incremental builds and I'm worried about long build times, what can you do? Well, there's a Drupal fast builds module that is currently on the dev version of the Gatsby Drupal module that caches everything. So if you run Gatsby develop once, it'll pull everything down, it'll process the images, you leave, you make a bunch of content changes on your Drupal site, you come back a couple days later, run Gatsby develop again, it's only going to pull down the content that changed. So if you have a large build time, this is going to make your developers and your builds a lot happier. It's going to be a lot faster. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip through some of this other stuff so I can get to some questions. This is available in the dev version of the module. In conclusion, try to keep your content editors happy. Here are some helpful links. I will include the slides here in the chat after this. And feel free to keep in touch. Join the Gatsby channel in Drupal Slack. We have a weekly Drupal Gatsby community meeting. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions in any of those channels. And I'll take questions now.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I can definitely see that there was a lot of excitement throughout your demos over the course of the session. So we've got a great list of questions here. First question's from Nick. Does the Drupal Gatsby module work with Layout Builder?
So Nick, right now, no. There are some things with Layout Builder in JSON API that make it tricky, or at least I'll say no as a caveat. Last time I checked, which was probably 4 to 6 months ago, it wasn't really easy to do. There were some people working on it, so I can't say definitively. I just know there hasn't been a clean path paved to getting that to work. I've always wanted to try to figure out a way to get it to work because I think it'd be a pretty cool experience. But as of right now, no. It works pretty well with paragraphs if you set it up right, so you can use paragraphs and have it move around up and down on your page, but not with Layout Builder, at least not to my knowledge. At least not yet.
Thanks, Shane. Next question comes in from Joe. Does incremental builds leverage Drupal cache tags or something similar to determine which pages need to be rebuilt?
So it doesn't use Drupal cache tags, but it does use essentially a log of content that's changed. So it keeps it in this, on the Drupal site, when you configure what entities you care about, if any of those entities are updated, deleted, or created, it keeps a log of that. And there's a timestamp on the Gatsby site that can kind of help. But the way incremental builds typically works is when you save the content on the Drupal site, let's say you save a new article, it actually posts the JSON for that specific article to Gatsby Cloud, and Gatsby Cloud will read that JSON, update your Gatsby site, and then deploy it out. So that's kind of the process of how it works. Hopefully that answers the question.
Wonderful, thanks. Questions back to back from Matt Glaman. First one is it pluggable in case you have embedded entities? Like, for example, if the embedded entity is modified, so you need to also say, hey, the parent should be considered modified as well.
So it does work with nested paragraphs, if that's what you're asking. Paragraphs can be nested entities, and you can have multiple levels, so it will work with that. There are some edge cases. It's not perfect, but it does has worked for a lot of different people. So I think the answer is yes, but know that there's probably some edge cases that still need to be ironed out.
Another question as well, which I accidentally missed because we've got such great chatter going on, which is, does this also support configuration entities in Drupal? So for example, if Gatsby reads some kind of default configuration entity like a meta tag entity, would it be able to rebuild based on that?
As of now, it doesn't read config entities. It only reads content entities, but that's a really good use case and something that hasn't really been considered too much to date, but probably should be, because that's a good, if you change the SEO on a page, you probably need, you may want to have it rebuild. So great feature suggestion for that.
Absolutely. And Matt, I'm not going to ask your third question because you have three questions. I'll let you connect with Shane afterwards, especially because that last question's, I think, very, very deep into the rabbit hole. So next question is from John. With Gatsby endpoints, can a single piece of content be sent to multiple front ends? And I'm assuming what this question is referring to is Gatsby Cloud potentially, or maybe John,
Yeah.
if you could
Yeah,
clarify.
no, I think I understand where your question. So, John, you're saying if you have one Drupal site and you have 3 or 4 front ends, could you create one piece of content and then send it to 2 of those sites, for instance? The answer is that's the goal. As of right now, I mean, it's still early days development, but that is the goal of it. There's some tricky things about if you send it to 2 sites, which site should show up in the preview, and which site should have the link to get to the live version. And so there's some little edge cases, but yeah, that's the goal, is that you could share content between multiple sites, or you could just have content be sent to 1 or 2 or however many you wanted. So the goal is yes, John, but there's some edge cases which is going to take that use case a little bit longer to become available, I think.
Thanks, Shane. And then we got time for one more question. This is from Joe, and there's a lot wrapped up in this question, which is there a seamless Markdown integration for Drupal Gatsby content creators and bloggers?
So seamless is a little bit of a loaded word, so I would say no. But there are some things that allow better Markdown integration. The way that I was doing it is just taking in the HTML from the article, the blog post. It just gets sent as HTML. But there are some tools that help turn your body content into Markdown, which could then be ingested into Gatsby. So yes, it's possible, but it's probably not super simple out of the box. I mean, you'll have to do a little playing around and might have to write a little code.